Hello, lovely readers, and welcome to another episode of Chapter Reactions with me, your favorite Elvish author, Christine E. Schulze, author of young adult fantasy, as well as a few kids' books. And today, we are actually going to be reading a selection from one of my books, the Strigoni sequence, which is actually an all-in-one series. Specifically, we are going to be reading a selection from book 1 in the series, which is, let me see if you can see right here, Golden Healer, Dark Enchantress. There's 3 books in this series: Golden Healer, Dark Enchantress, and then Memory Charmer, and then Wish Granter. And yeah, it says on the blurb here, dive inside the Strigoni sequence and discover a hidden world filled with vampires, genies, fairies, elementals, and other fantastical creatures. Dive inside the Strigoni sequence and discover a hidden world filled with vampires, genies, fairies, elementals, and other fantastical creatures, many of whom are trapped inside dangerous spells. Can each spell be broken before it's too late? So this trilogy is comprised of different books and stories that in each one, there is someone who's trapped inside a spell that needs to be broken. So kind of dark fairy tale-esque. But what I've done is I've taken vampires, genies, fairies, common creatures and peoples in fantasy, but kind of put my own twist on them. I was inspired to write Golden Healer, the first book in the series, when I very first read Twilight, which I know some of you are going to roll your eyes at. But honestly, when I discovered Twilight, it wasn't this big well, I guess it probably was a big popular thing, but I was completely unaware of that. I kind of grew up, more sheltered. I grew up in a Christian school, which I loved. But what that means is that I wasn't really very exposed to things that were really going on in the world. So when I discovered Twilight, I just remember reading it and thinking, wow, I really like the concept of good vampires. I've never even thought about that before. And again, I had no knowledge of the Twilight craze, that it was popular, or anything like that yet. I was just genuinely intrigued by the book of my own accord. And so that kind of inspired me to write Golden Healer. Now, a lot of my books, are young adult fantasy, and a lot of them will have themes like friendship, forgiveness, good versus evil. But this one I will let you know that I would label specifically as Christian fantasy, because a lot of the characters are Christian and they just very naturally, talk about their faith throughout the books. So if that's something that maybe would be off-putting for you, this might not be the best choice of my books for you. But yeah, I guess, we're just going to dive in. So strap on your elf ears and get ready to listen to a selection from Golden Healer, Dark Enchantress, the first book in the Strigoni sequence. And yeah, like I said, I won't be reacting to this because I wrote it myself. But if you guys, I'd love to hear your reaction to what you think about, the series, the look of the cover. If you've read the books, what do you think about them? What do you think about this video and the selection that I'm going to read? Is it something that you think you'd be interested in? Do you have any questions about the book? All those are things I'd love to hear below down in the comments. But yeah, we're just going to hop in. So let's get to it with, so big, Golden Healer, Dark Enchantress. We got this quote at the beginning that says, it is not the, that's not what the quote says. It is the choices we make, not the circumstances which spur our need to make those choices, that define who we truly are. Ah yes, I forgot that there's a prologue. He leaned close and whispered in my ear, "Are you afraid?" His piercing green eyes watched carefully as I gazed about the massive... Oh yeah, I forgot that there's a prologue. We'll start with that. The prologue. He leaned close and whispered in my ear, "Are you afraid?" His piercing green eyes watched carefully as I gazed about the vast expanse of the cavern. The orange glow of the massive bonfire glistened on the beautiful faces of the many vampires gathered. Perhaps I should be afraid, surrounded by hundreds of them. Yet this place didn't feel dangerous at all. While their cousins had used their ancient magic for harm, these beings had vowed to protect. A certainty that I'd been led to them for a purpose filled my heart, along with God's peace. He had called me to the incredible task that lay ahead and would give me the strength needed to complete it. Besides, Aaron sat right beside me. His strong arms wrapped around me promised safety, and his cool touch soothed. Perhaps I should be afraid of him as well, but he had never given me any reason to fear him. His love was true, and he would never let any of them, including himself, hurt me. His love was true, and he would never let any of them, including himself, hurt me. No, I said softly, laying my head on his shoulder. I'm not afraid. He hugged me a little closer and kissed my forehead. A thrill rippled through me, down to the deepest corners of my heart. Content, I thanked God silently for his and Aaron's love before drifting into a peaceful sleep. So as you can see, that's where the Christian fantasy elements come in, is, this main character is a Christian, and so she just ends up talking about God and her faith a lot. It's not meant to be, preachy. It's just, with me being a Christian, I wanted to incorporate some just naturally Christian characters, and I also wanted to play with the idea of, could vampires be Christian? Could their souls be saved? Why or why not? But yeah, let's get into chapter 1, Curiosity. I loved my dad, but I didn't love it when he was drunk. He had started drinking after Mom died. With the alcohol, his temper sprang to life, along with the cursing, name-calling, and shouting. He alternated between the loving father I once knew and this person I no longer recognized. It was a wonder he still held his job as a sanitation worker. He collected garbage and literally thought of himself as trash. I tried to convince him otherwise, but he only spiraled down into a deeper depression. The drinking intensified, and from there, the abuse began. As much as it hurt when he called me names or put his hands on me, I could never hate him. The most difficult part was feeling that there was nothing that I could do to help him. Only God could change him, and he had to want that change. All I could do was pray and love him and leave him in God's hands. I stood before my bathroom mirror one morning, brushing on makeup to try and cover the scratch that ran from my left ear down to my chin, a remnant of my father's drunken rampage last night. I don't know why I bothered. Aaron's keen eyesight would detect it no matter what I did. I finished pulling on my long-sleeved green tee and jeans and ignored the springy blonde ringlets just brushing my shoulders. There was nothing to be done for the wild curls. They had a mind of their own today. I fed Jojo, my little gray poodle, and locked her securely in my room. My dad's moods were unpredictable, and I didn't want to risk her getting in the way of his wrath. Slinging my backpack over one shoulder, I crept up the stairs as quietly as possible, pausing to listen at the top. A loud snore startled me, and I peered around the corner. Dad lay passed out on the couch, the floor littered with empty beer bottles. I could safely leave the house without further drama. I started up my car and headed toward the college, my favorite, if solitary, safe haven. I had just started my studies as a healer. As a force-footer elf, I already possessed a natural inclination toward healing. However, God had also blessed me with something extra special. Force-footer elves typically bore a green thumb and toe for growing all kinds of plants, but I was born with a rare golden thumb. I could heal any disease or injury with the right words, and loads of practice. Of course, it wasn't as easy as it sounded. Healing took a lot of concentration and could leave me feeling drained. But I had practiced a lot, healing childhood cuts, scrapes, and bruises on my friends. One time, I even healed a broken bone. In fact, that was how I first met Aaron, my best friend in all the world. Aaron's family had just moved in across the street, and he had watched me for several days. I was a junior in high school then, and often caught him peering out the window as I left for school or chatted outside with my neighborhood friends, Sarah and Grace. Neither girl was magically inclined, but we shared many common interests and had been besties for years. Their views on boys, however, were very different. This was reflected one day as we all sat in my front yard, chatting casually as I had healed Sarah's ankle. She had just fractured it falling off a skateboard. Why she had accepted a dare from Freddie Parker to skateboard, I'd never know. She was such an accident-prone klutz that it was fortunate she didn't kill herself. "Someone's staring at you again, Emma," Grace said to me. A playful smile lit her brown, almond-shaped eyes, and she twirled a strand of her silky black hair with a familiar, dreamy smile. Sarah snorted and ran a hand through her honey-brown hair in annoyance, all the while glaring at Aaron through his window across the street. "Humph, creep. I'd be giving him what for if he kept stalking me like that." "I don't really think looking out your window qualifies as stalking," I said with a chuckle. Sarah shot him another warning glare, but I could almost swear he laughed as he pulled away from the window and let the curtain fall. Clearly, he found her more amusing than intimidating. And why should he be the one intimidated? He was impossibly handsome and always seemed so cool, calm, poised. The most unique thing about Aaron's appearance was his skin, which was a flawless, snowy white, very unusual for someone of Hispanic descent. The Ruizes, the family who had adopted him, were also Hispanic, But strangely enough, Mrs. Ruiz's skin tone matched. The most unique thing about Aaron's appearance was his skin, which was a flawless snowy white, very unusual for someone of Hispanic. The most unique thing about Aaron's appearance was his skin, which was a flawless snowy white, very unusual for someone of Hispanic descent. Why can't I read this sentence, man? The most unique thing about Aaron's appearance was his skin, a flawless snowy white, very unusual for someone of Hispanic descent. The Ruizes, the family who had adopted him, were also Hispanic, but strangely enough, Mrs. Ruiz's skin tone matched Aaron's milky white. Anyone who didn't know better would swear they were actually related. I finished healing Sarah's ankle, but the moment I stood up, I began to fall, suddenly dizzy and weak from the intense healing. Expecting my head to hit concrete, I braced myself for the pain. There was nothing I could do. I was barely strong enough to keep my eyes open. Sarah screamed and reached toward me, nearly tripping in the process, and I thought how I would strangle her if she broke her other ankle trying to catch me. As my vision dimmed, I felt the strongest and gentlest arms catching me. My vision blurred, but for a moment I could swear I caught a glimpse of Aaron watching me, his face flooded with concern. His heart pulsed with a powerful warmth against my body, but his hands felt shockingly cold. He seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. I smiled faintly before closing my eyes. I must be dreaming, or else I had overused my magic to the point of making myself delirious. Whether dream or daydream, his coming to my rescue was fine by me. I awoke staring at a bright white ceiling, a ceiling I recognized by its large skylight. My dad and I had toured this house when we decided to move to this neighborhood. I knew who lived there now, and I turned to see Aaron kneeling beside me. Must still be dreaming. May as well enjoy it. I studied him carefully, getting my first really good look at him. He has Hispanic facial features, and his tousled hair was jet black, matching a neatly trimmed goatee. His eyes captivated me the most. They were not the brown I expected, but rather a vivid green. They held a certain depth that commanded my attention in a way I couldn't describe. He smiled, flashing a perfectly white smile. A blush crept into my cheeks, and the blood rushing to my face felt awfully warm for this to be a mere dream, as did my embarrassment. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Fine," I muttered timidly. "Good." His smile intensified. "You're at my house. Your dad's not home from work yet, so Grace gave me his number. I called, and he sounded very concerned, but I assured him that you were going to be fine. My mother's an excellent healer, though I suppose you already know a thing or two about healing." His gaze darted to my hands folded across my lap. My golden thumb still glowed faintly from healing Sarah's bone. That was one of the most extreme things I've ever attempted. Maybe not the best idea. "I'm glad you did it." He smirked mischievously. "And I'm sure your friend is too." "Where is she?" I asked, glancing about the spacious living room. "Both of them." "Your friends had to go home. After I convinced them I was just here to help, not murder you. That saucy brunette, Sarah, I think, glared at me almost the whole time. Honestly, if looks could kill." "Aaron, could you come here for a second?" a woman called from another room. "I'll be right back," he said. "Okay," I said, watching him as he left. I was glad that he left for a moment. It gave my mind a chance to clear up a bit. Aaron. I filed the name carefully in my memory. I was becoming more and more convinced that this wasn't a dream, and I figured that remembering the name of the cute boy from across the street who had saved my life could prove useful. Aaron returned, followed by a woman with porcelain skin and dark red waves of hair, Mrs. Ruiz. She knelt beside me, smiling gently. "Hello, dear. I'm Aaron's mother. You can call me Sylvia. How are you feeling?" Her green eyes reminded me of Aaron's, and I liked her at once. She didn't look a day over 25, though I knew this couldn't be true because the Ruizes had a biological daughter who was older than Aaron. "Still tired," I said, "but much better." "Good. You'll be resting for a couple of days, I'm afraid." "But what about school?" I frowned. From the corner of my eye, I saw Aaron smirk and roll his eyes. "Aaron can bring your homework to you. Don't worry about that." Aaron wasn't in any of my classes, yet I somehow felt that with his natural charm, he wouldn't have any trouble obtaining my homework. Sylvia gave me a drink made from a combination of bitter-smelling herbs. It tasted awful, but she assured me that it would make me feel much better. As I gagged the last of it down, the phone rang and Aaron rushed to answer it. "There," Sylvia said as I handed her the empty cup. "I'll be back in a couple of hours to give you some more. Holler if you need something." I thanked her and forced a wavering smile. The thought of sampling any more of the revolting stuff almost made me wish this was a dream after all. Aaron returned, carrying a portable phone. "For you?" He handed it to me before plopping casually in a big squashy armchair across from the couch. "It's Grace." I put the phone to my ear and tried to ignore him as he grinned at me, making me blush madly. Hello, Grace. Oh, Emma, she cried in her expected overdramatic voice. Are you all right? Oh, I was so worried you'd been killed or... Grace, I'm fine. Aaron's mom is taking good care of me. Her voice morphed into a swift, excited whisper. Oh, Aaron, is that his name? Did you see how he swept in from nowhere and saved you? Oh, he's so handsome. What do you think he is? Fairy? Elf? Wizard? He must be something magic with those looks and the pointed ears. I stole a quick glance at Aaron. Pointed ears, just like mine. How did I not notice before? Too captivated by his eyes, I suppose. He was still smiling right at me, and I quickly turned away. Oh, he's a keeper, that one, Grace prattled on. Did you see how he looked at you? No, of course not. You were unconscious, but he was watching you ever so intently the whole time. My cheeks burned as I heard a snort from Aaron's direction. But I won't take up any more of your quality time together. She giggled shamelessly. Just wanted to see how you were doing, though I'm sure you're doing more than fine with him. Well, talk to you later. Bye. Bye, Grace. I no sooner pressed the end button on the phone than it rang again. I glanced over at Aaron, who only sat looking amused. It's all right, he said. Answer it. I did so, and instantly Sarah was off on one of her rants. Oh, thank God you're alive, but for Pete's sake, just you wait till I get my hands around that Freddie Parker's neck. I told him he better not even call you. That little weasel, don't you know this is all his fault? Not only me nearly tragically dying, but you too, and being rescued by that guy. He's quite handsome, of course, and he seems nice, but you know how those cute ones are. You have to be careful about them. Most handsome guy on campus broke my sister's heart once. Gerald, you remember him. Stupid name anyways, so you keep an eye on that one. Do you know he kept staring at you while you slept? Talk about a creeper. I only left because my mother needed me, but I was sure to get his phone number so I could check up on you. I tell you, if he lays a hand on you, I'll strangle him along with Freddie. She ranted on for another 2 minutes or so. Who knows how long she would have continued if her mother hadn't called to help her unload groceries. I was grateful when she finally took that last deep breath and said goodbye, wishing me a good afternoon, and for Pete's sake to be careful, because by now she had convinced herself that Aaron might be a serial killer, or at least an evil sorcerer. I hung up and sighed relief. Sarah meant well, but her distrust in boys often drove me crazy. I turned to Aaron. Thanks, you can put it up. I doubt Freddie will be calling too. Aaron got up and took the phone, still smiling bemusedly, and headed into the adjoining room. Upon returning, he sat back in the armchair, grinning at me. For a while, nothing was said. He just studied me, making me feel more and more awkward, especially as my blushing face betrayed me. At last, he said, So, Emma, is it? My face felt even redder, if that was possible. Yes? Did you hear everything? He smirked impishly. Very sensitive hearing and eyesight, two of my special abilities. As I glared in irritation, he only laughed. It's a pretty name. I'm Aaron Ruiz. It's nice to meet you. He was suddenly kneeling beside the couch, though I hadn't seen him move. I couldn't help staring again, wondering if Superman himself sat before me instead of a fairy or elf. Your friends are quite talkative, he added casually. Do you ever get a word in? Occasionally. I'm more the quiet one, though. He only smiled in reply. We talked for a while after that, about school and what kind of books and movies we were into. My shyness soon melted. He was actually very easy to talk to, and doing so gave me a sense of security and calm. From that day on, we were friends. Sarah eventually accepted him, after seeing he wasn't hanging around to seduce any of us or break our hearts. Grace loved him, and as for Freddie, well, he made sure to keep his distance until he created an apology lavish enough for even Sarah to accept. I pulled up to the college. The college was fairly small, only about 3,000 students, mostly fairies and elves and non-magical people too, with a few sorcerers and enchanters. For the most part, magic and non-magic people lived and worked and studied together in harmony, thanks to the pact established between the Lazolian Council and the U.S. government some decades ago. At my college, the magical students couldn't enter the buildings containing the non-magic courses until they had mastered their special abilities for the sake of everyone's safety. While most fairies and elves, like myself, received their magical powers at birth and had them well under control by the time they entered college, there were those whose powers didn't manifest until they were in their teens. The magic building stood not only so that the magical peoples could master their skills and learn about their history, but also to prevent accidents that might harm unsuspecting non-magical types. Exiting my car and slinging my backpack over my shoulder, I started for the main campus building. Today was a Tuesday, which meant I would visit with Aaron and the girls a whole 2 hours in between the English and math classes. English passed rather too quickly. Normally, I looked forward to class ending, seeing my friends, but that day, instead of focusing on my paper, my mind drifted as I contemplated how to hide the long scratch stretching from my ear down to my chin. Maybe if I pulled my hair to the side just so. The girls knew all about my dad's abuse. They would understand, but I had never told Aaron. Aaron was very protective, which was good for us, as we really were a trio of clutches. He had saved us from many a near mishap and from boys who had tried to push us around in high school. His temper flared when it came to someone so much as even threatening us, particularly me, as if he seemed to think I needed the most protection. One time, he and my ex-boyfriend, Oric, got into a fight. Oric had threatened to harm my friends if I didn't date him again. Aaron had jumped on him in a flash, landing Oric with a broken arm and a couple of broken ribs. Thankfully, I was able to calm him down enough to make him stop before he took things too far. I was strong enough then to use my magic to heal Oric's bones. Aaron had protested, but I didn't want him going to jail or getting in any other trouble. Aaron's powers were far more advanced than mine, and while that normally made me feel safe, I also hated to think what reaction he might have if he saw the scratch on my face. While his powers were well under control, I couldn't always say the same for his temper. I typed the last draft of my English paper with a scowl. I would never be able to hide last night's damage from him. I jumped as someone asked, "And how are you today, Emma?" Looking up, I forced a smile at Corey Lund, my English teacher. He had a very cool demeanor, and we all just called him Lund. I had developed a deep admiration for him in the chill, big brother I never had but always wanted type of way. "I'm good," I lied. "How are you?" Good, good. How's that paper coming?" He stroked the goatee that matched his sandy brown hair. "Good. Yeah, it's good." Thankfully, my paper wasn't as colorless as my current conversation. "Did you get the necklace for your birthday?" At first I was confused, but then I realized I must have fallen asleep wearing it. My birthday was last week. I just turned 19. My dad had been gratefully sober that day. He had given me the cross pendant I wore now, a beautiful white gold cross with scalloped edges, inlaid with smooth black onyx stone. Yeah, I did," I said. "Aaron?" Lund asked with a playful twinkle in his inquisitive brown eyes. I blushed. "No, my dad." "Ah, well, it's very pretty. Thank you." He sauntered off to check on Carwin, who had fallen asleep in the corner, as usual. I felt flustered as I turned back to my English paper. Sometimes it was a bit annoying to have an old friend of Aaron's family as a teacher. It did have its uses, though, like getting ideas on what to get Aaron for his birthday. Too soon, English came to an end. I slipped my jacket on and zipped it up, keeping the collar as high as I could without looking stupid and flipping my hair from my left shoulder in hopes that no one, especially Aaron, would notice anything out of place. As I emerged from the hallway, Aaron stood leaning casually against the wall, grinning. He smiled widely as he saw me. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he replied. "Grace and Sarah are meeting us down in the cafeteria today. They got out of class early." "Okay." We started downstairs. "You look nice today," he added. Thanks," I muttered, feeling my face go red. 3 years. Over 3 years I had known him now, and I still blushed furiously every time he complimented me. Sometimes I get so frustrated with myself over it. Certainly he noticed, but he never said anything about it. He couldn't possibly know how much I'd grown to love him, but he had to at least suspect that I liked him. Grace and Sarah were very insistent on the fact that he liked me too. Sarah especially insisted. She had 2 older brothers and seemed to think she was some sort of expert on the subject. I had once thought so too, but when I finally gathered up the courage to ask him, he said he just thought of us as really good friends. Said it had nothing to do with me, said that he wouldn't be good for me anyway, and that he just ended up hurting me. I found this hard to believe, but I had accepted it. Things were a little weird between us for a while after that conversation, but now we were as close as ever. As we entered the cafeteria, Grace and Sarah sat at one of the high round tables, waving at us enthusiastically. We headed over, Aaron grabbed me a chair, and we joined the girls at the table. For the first few minutes, Sarah rambled on and on about how stupid English had been that day and how they hadn't learned a thing, while Grace chattered about how hot Billy Mason was. He sat right next to her in class. It was hard to keep up with both conversations at once, but we had heard the Billy Mason spiel several times before anyway. As they prattled on, Aaron and I shared understanding smiles. So, Aaron said, once he could get a word in, "I was wondering if you'd all like to go to the movies this evening." "Sure," I said, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. I'm sure my dad won't mind." "Great." He turned to Sarah and Grace. "And you two?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but Grace quickly said, "Oh, sorry, Sarah and I, we're busy studying last minute for our math class." Sarah stared at Grace like she was crazy. "We are?" Grace gave her a sharp look, and Sarah finally caught on. "Oh, Yes, we are. We are indeed. I shot them a look that said, thanks a lot, in a deathly sarcastic way. Not that I wasn't thrilled at the thought of spending a night alone with Aaron, but we'd never done anything together except in a group, and I suddenly felt as nervous as if he was just some random guy I'd met, instead of my best friend. What if I just stuttered and made a fool of myself the whole night? Aaron, however, seemed happy enough. He smiled and said, well, that's okay. Another time, then. There's a showing right after your class, Emma. You think that'll work? Sure, I said, nervously stroking my hair over my shoulder. That'll be great. 15 minutes later, Sarah and Grace announced that they needed to get to class. To our usual spot, Aaron asked once they had gone. Sure, I said. Our spot was in the hallway, on a cushioned bench close to one of the doors leading outside. We often met there on days like today, when we had an hour left to kill between classes. We sat there and talked casually for a while before Aaron asked, Emma, do you feel okay today? I frowned at him, confused. Yeah? Why? Well, you've had your jacket on the whole time, and everyone else is wearing short sleeves. It's just a little odd. He was right. It was stifling. Someone must have turned the heat on extra high. The only thing saving me from suffocation was the fact that a constant cool breeze wafted in as students opened the door. I pushed my hair behind my ear, one of my usual nervous tics, unsure what to say. I stammered. What is that? Aaron demanded, his tone suddenly sharp. Nothing. I realized my mistake and tried to pull my hair back over my shoulder. Oh, no, you don't, he said firmly. Look at me. Reluctantly, I flipped the hair back and turned toward him. Anger flared in his sharp green eyes. Who did this to you? Aaron, it's okay, I said quietly, glancing down at my lap. Okay? The hell it is. You tell me who's done this to you. Was it Oric? If that jerk's come back, I'll... Aaron, it wasn't Oric. I looked up at him. His temper calmed somewhat, melting into concern. Emma, he said gently, tell me, who is it? I hesitated, and then said softly, It's my dad. For the longest moment, he just stared at me. Then, he said slowly, Your dad? Yes. How long? About 2 years. More silent staring. He looked shocked and like he struggled to control his temper at the same time. Sarah and Grace? They know. Why didn't you ever tell me? He sounded hurt, and that pained me far more than if he had been angry. I was afraid of what you might do. He flinched, as if that hurt him too. Then he said, Is it very bad? No, I lied. I dared not tell him it was getting worse. Isn't there somewhere else you could go? Where? You could live with us, he said quickly. At first I was surprised, but his gaze was sincere. No, I couldn't. Yes, you could. I could talk to my parents. They would understand. I hardly knew what to say. Aaron had always gone out of his way to protect me, but this was a very big decision to make on a whim. Please don't say anything, I said. Not to anyone. If I decide otherwise, I'll tell you. But for now, please don't. He took a deep breath, clearly struggling with himself, but finally said, All right, I won't do anything. For now. But... He leaned forward, his earnest green eyes gazing fiercely into mine. If you ever need me, if you need anything, just call and I'll be there. If you're ever afraid that something really bad might happen, I'll be there to protect you. I shivered as his hand crept up to caress my face. It was the first time he ever really touched me since the day we'd first met, and his hand was unexpectedly cold. As if reading my thoughts, he jerked back his hand, turned away, and jumped up. I have to get to class, he muttered. Okay, I said. Do you want me to walk with you? My class was pushed back again. No, he said, rather harshly. I could tell by his familiar scowl he was annoyed with himself, not with me. No, he repeated more gently. I'll be fine. See you tonight? He smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Sure, I said, watching as he exited the building until he was out of sight. Then I sat staring at the wall for a few moments, trying to grasp what had just happened. Aaron had touched my face, and it had sent a thrill to my heart, yet it had also sent a chill through my skin. What could these things mean? And could the girls be right? Could he really like me, even though he had denied it? Why was he so cautious about touching me? Everyone had cold hands from time to time, I tried to reason. Mine were nearly always cold. And yet, his were cold in a somehow strange, unsettling way. As I felt something smooth and cool beside me, I broke out of my reverie and looked down. His leather jacket. I grabbed the jacket, sprang off the bench, and raced out the door, hoping I could catch him in time. He was several yards in the distance already, but I knew he'd be able to hear me with his heightened sense of hearing. I called his name, and he tripped over the sprinkler, which soaked him head to toe. As if seeing him falter wasn't jarring enough, his skin abruptly turned a brilliant shade of green. He came to a dead halt, stiff as stone, his face reflecting anger at his blunder. Now I understood why he never wanted me to follow him in the rain, unless he carried an oversized umbrella big enough for the two of us. He stood still a few moments, as if contemplating what to do. He knew I had seen him, of course. He smiled at me, but stiffly. For whatever reason, he had never intended for me to see him like this. I made my way over as casually as I could. What do you say when you see your best friend's skin change from snow white to emerald green with no explanation? Even in the magical world, some things were just bizarre. Hey there, I said. Here's your jacket. Thanks, he mumbled. He took the jacket, then pulled me beneath a tree. Away from the sprinkler, his strange green hue began to vanish. He kept his voice low as he said, Promise me that you'll tell no one what you saw. I promise. Not even Sarah or Grace, he snapped, as if it was life or death. I promise, I said again. He studied me carefully, and I glanced away. I always hated when he scrutinized me. Finally, he said, Good. Promise me something else. All right. Promise that you'll always trust me, no matter what. His deep green eyes pleaded. I didn't know why he would ask such a thing. We'd always been honest with each other. I'm sure I looked perplexed, but I only said, I trust you. He closed his eyes and sighed deeply, as if very relieved. Then he opened his eyes again and said, Emma, you're my best friend, and I care about you very much. I don't want you to get hurt, so it's really in your best interest if you can trust me and not go looking for answers. I nodded slowly. I have to get to class, he said. All right. See you at the movie tonight? Sure. He rushed off toward the magic building, leaving me to stare after him, totally baffled by what had just happened. Don't go looking for answers. Of course, he knew I was naturally curious, knew I liked to find answers for everything. But what could be so bad about bright green skin? What could he possibly want to hide from me? Against his commands, I found myself heading toward the library. Besides, he ought to know me well enough by now that if someone told me not to look for answers, looking for answers was exactly what I was going to do. That is the end of Chapter 1 of Golden Healer, Dark Enchantress from the Strigoni sequence. So obviously, there are some Twilight as parallels. Aaron saves her, and he's super fast, has super good eyesight, hearing. He doesn't sparkle in the sun, but he turns colors in the water or the rain, which is a little weird. So there are definitely some parallel story arcs. Like I said, this story was originally inspired by Twilight, but I didn't, want it to be like obviously a Twilight ripoff. So you discover pretty early on in the book that Aaron's a vampire. That's not really the whole mystery of the whole book. But then a lot of other things happen that make it different. We end up traveling to a different time within a different world. No, not a different time. I'm thinking of one of my other books. But we do end up traveling to a completely different world, a completely different dimension. There's a dark enchantress that the good vampires, such as Aaron, are trying to defeat. And she's kind of in charge of the evil vampires that are out for human blood constantly. There's, Emma being a force-footer elf, which again, they're normally born with a green thumb that allows them to grow plants, but she's born with a special golden thumb, and that will come into play as to how she can help Aaron and the other good vampires. So again, it definitely starts off Twilight-esque, but then we definitely branch off into a completely different story. Now, Golden Healer Dark Enchantress isn't a super long book in and of itself, but some of the other stories are a little bit longer. Just to talk about some of the characters for a second, Sarah and Grace, Emma's two best friends that are just regular non-magic humans, they end up having stories of their own. So in book 2, which is called Memory Charmer, that is about, it's still about Aaron and Emma are in that one, but it's also about some other characters that we meet in Golden Healer Dark Enchantress. And then book 3 is comprised of 3 different stories, and there's a story that we get about Sarah, who goes on her own magical adventure, Grace, who goes on her own magical adventure involving genies, and again, one other character that we're going to meet later on in Golden Healer Dark Enchantress. But yeah, that's my introduction to the Strigoni sequence. We'll probably read some selections from the other books in a later video. Tell me what your guys' thoughts are. Do you have any questions about the books that I can answer without giving you any spoilers? If you've read these books, what are your thoughts on them? And just what are your thoughts on this video? Please be sure to like or not like and subscribe and share with all of your book-loving friends who might want to discover some new books on my channel. And yeah, on that note, happy reading. May you be inspired by whatever you go on to read. And I will see you in my next video.